Pleasure for me to introduce William Dalrymple's lecture, Delhi, the City of Djinns, and also, to our great pleasure, a little bit on Princes and Painters in Mughal Delhi too, part of our programme on urban landscapes, Indian case studies, curated by Marina Engel. William Dalrymple is one of the West's most successful travel and historical writers, as well as being a leading authority on Indian culture. His highly entertaining books elegantly combine a unique blend of scholarship and storytelling and transcultural investigations, and have won many international awards. From his first book, In Zandu, A Quest, he has moved on through Marco Polo, to the City of the Djinns, to the White Mughals, and then the last Mughal, the fall of a dynasty, Delhi, 1857, and is now working on the First Anglo-Afghan War and the birth of the Great Game, a topic which is truly topical. The lecture tonight will focus on, in part, on the City of the Djinns and on Dalrymple's love affair with India. And this concern with Delhi, a city with a bottomless seam of stories, works extraordinarily well with the programme of events which we have curated here, which began with a photographic exhibition just a few weeks ago. On June the 26th, at 4 o'clock, Keats Shelley House will also host a reading by William Dalrymple from his book, Last Mughal, The Fall of a Dynasty, Delhi, 1857, an event which is open to the public, although advance booking is recommended. So there's a plug for our fellow institution, Keats Shelley House and Museum, a partner who has supported us in this event. On a personal note, it's a pleasure for me. William and I met in St Andrews, and William had excellent Scottish credentials. It was a very great pleasure for me to be present when William Dalrymple received an honorary degree from my university, the University of St Andrews. And I can attest to the enthusiasm with which that award was received by many who have read and enjoyed his books, and have also been struck by the profundity of learning, which is worn lightly, but is nevertheless genuinely profound. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome William Dalrymple to give this lecture and to more or less conclude our programme of events for this year and commence the summer. I can think of no better way, a sparkling Pimm's as it were, on this evening. William, over to you.
When I first went to Delhi in 1984, it was on the back of many years of coming to Rome. I had a brother who was studying here for the priesthood. And so when I first saw Delhi, I immediately wanted to compare it with Rome, a city which it resembles in many ways. Like Rome, it's a natural capital. It's a city that has kept reclaiming the centre of affairs century after century. There have been many occasions when people have tried to move the capital of India away from Delhi, and it has this strange ability to return to its natural position. Delhi, just for those who need a bit of geographical help here, is situated here, with the Himalayas above. It commands the routes in from Afghanistan, it commands the great rivers, the Yamuna and the Jamuna, and blocks off the deserts heading towards the Middle East. And it's a perfect defensive position to defend any possible attack on India. It's well watered, it's perfectly situated. And for that reason, it has been the centre of affairs almost as long as Rome has. The capital of the Pandava brothers in the Mahabharata, the great Indian epic, was underneath the current city of Delhi, the city of Indraprastha. And it then goes through successive phases as a Rajput fortress, a Pathan colony ruling India on behalf of Afghan rulers. And it comes into its great period of world dominance. It becomes one of the great world cities quite late on, in the mid-17th century, with the building of Shah Jahanabad, the great Mughal city of Delhi. the speed with which Delhi grew to be one of the most magnificent capitals in the world, one of the two great capitals of Asia, along with Ming Beijing, took everyone by surprise. By the time Milton comes to write Paradise Lost, Milton has God give Adam a tour of the future wonders that mankind will enact on earth. And he takes him on a tour of Mughal Delhi in Paradise Lost, a symbol of the degree to which, for a British person, a European, living in the 17th century, the Mughals were almost a synonym with power and might. And the word Mughal lives on in the English language. When people talk about a Hollywood Mughal or a business Mughal, it's often an unwitting reflection of the power with which Europeans were impressed by the sheer splendor of the Mughal court. One of the most interesting things about Mughal culture is that while the greatest Mughal buildings, like the Taj Mahal, like the Red Fort, like the Delhi Jama Masjid, come up at the very peak of Mughal power with Shah Jahan, at a time when from Delhi is ruled not just almost all of India, but also all of modern Pakistan, all of modern Bangladesh, almost all of modern Afghanistan, and some of modern Iran. So not only is all this area ruled, but what is interesting is the way that perhaps the cultural peak of Delhi, at a point when in literary terms it is producing its most magnificent poetry, this comes later. This comes during the period of economic and political decline. And at the same time as the power of the Mughals is shrinking in the 17th century, it's at this point that you get the most spectacular painting and the most spectacular literature. The slides that I'm going to show you in the first part of this talk are from a show, Princes and Painters in Mughal Delhi, that I put on in New York earlier this year. And these images I show, I think, very well, I think, the spectacular power and beauty of Mughal images. This is the period of Shah Jahan. This is painted in Agra just before, just as the Taj Mahal is coming up, just while the city of Shah Jahanabad is being constructed. Subsequent images, this is one of my favorite by the great painter Nainsur, take on this legacy. And it's during this period when the Persian marauder Nadir Shah is coming and taking the collected plunder that's accumulated in Delhi over the centuries. Nadir Shah comes and takes it back to Persia. The Peacock Throne is still in Iran. The great Koh-i-Noor, which is the largest diamond in the world, goes to Persia, then subsequently ends up, of course, in the British Crown after several other adventures on the way. And it's at this period in the early 18th century that you get these extraordinary images of Mughal noblemen being painted in Delhi. This is Nadir Shah, who comes and raids Delhi and loots it. What Attila is to Rome, Nadir Shah is to Delhi. And it's at this period you get this extraordinary experimentation with colour. This is an image of Muhammad Shah Rangila. Rangila means colourful or merrymaker. And Muhammad Shah is shown celebrating the great spring festival of Holi with this wonderful splash of orange and red colours, showing this tradition which still carries on today of splashing everybody with spring colours. And Muhammad Shah comes at the end of a period of Puritanism. Just like in Britain you get all the ebullience of the Stuart court after the Puritanism of Oliver Cromwell, so in Muhammad Shah's Delhi you get, after a period of Puritanism and Islamic propriety under the Emperor Aurangzeb, you suddenly have this spectacular period of colour and pageantry. Here again, I mean, in a very un-Islamic way, Muhammad Shah is shown pelting courtesans with colour in a Hindu festival. So not only we have a Mughal Muslim emperor celebrating a Hindu festival, he's celebrating a Hindu festival in the company of courtesans. And in this period you get endless pictures of parties, of firework displays, also images of piety, many of them indeterminately Hindu or Muslim in style. And then in the early 19th century, you have the arrival of the British. And a very different, this is the first British ambassador at the Mughal court, Sir David Ochterlony. A very different figure to the starchy image of a British imperialist that we come to imagine. Ochterlony, far from, while in his official clothes, can be seen here in a company red coat. In private, wore Mughal dress, smoked a hookah, a water pipe, he's wearing a turban, he has a eunuch with a fly whisk behind him, he has his dancing girls and his wives. This is a man who famously had no less than 13 Indian wives, each of whom had her own elephant. And every evening a wonderful procession leaves the British residency with Ochterlony in the lead and does a loop around the Red Fort. With Ochterlony in the lead. And best of all, I love the pictures of the outraged Scottish ancestors peering down from the picture rail, wondering what's happened to Ur Devi after a few years in the Indian sun. This is very much par for the course. You have, at this stage, an odd sort of reversal of colonialism. The British go out to India, but at this period, rather than imposing their ways on India, they themselves are colonized. They themselves culturally go over to this very attractive civilization. And this sort of counter-colonization takes place because of the sheer attractiveness of late Mughal culture. The British respond very immediately to this world of poetry readings, of miniature painting, of hawking and hunting. And they describe it like one of the Gauguin or going out to the South Pacific. It's as if they've discovered a paradise. And these early British residents, this is my wife's ancestor, William Fraser. You can see him here. This is what he looks like when he's in Scotland, painted by Raeburn. But when he arrives in India, he immediately begins to develop very elaborate moustaches and he goes completely over to Indian culture like his boss Ochterlony. And he goes on to commission one of the most important artworks to come out of Delhi at this period, which is called the Fraser Album, after him. And he has given the Mughal artists European botanical prints as a model. And these company school images, as they're known, are fantastically detailed in the Mughal tradition, and yet they have this, they're on a white background, these are individual portraits, they're not sort of types or in any way caricatures, they're individuals captured very much as they were. And they vary from grandees like this is a group of Sikh noblemen at the court of Patiala, to ordinary villagers paying their taxes. This is the visit of the taxman. He's come here. All the villagers have brought their tax documents out to show how much they're meant to pay. They're all sitting there looking as one does when one gets an income tax demand. The two officials are measuring up what each man has to pay. And this is the sort of really realistic scene of ordinary Indians going about their daily life and their interactions with the government, which has never been depicted before. And you get these spectacular pictures. This is one of Fraser's own personal servants, shown as he had appeared from the fields of Haryana to enter his service. And then the same man shown dressed up in his full, almost Napoleonic livery. And even this kind of magnification doesn't show the extraordinary detail of the painting. Every single hair in the beard is captured. Also, at the same time, the Fraser album contains images of Fraser's own family, for this is Fraser's girlfriend in his village, and Fraser's young daughter, and indeed Fraser's, here she is again, and Fraser's brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws. He has this double life as a British resident, but also as the lover of this village woman, who he stays with for many years. And the example set by Fraser in the Fraser album produced an entirely new wave of painting, this company school painting, mixing Mughal detail and Mughal ideas of perspective with new European techniques coming out of Europe. There's a mixture of Mughal stone-based pigments, mineral-based pigments, and European watercolours. And these are all of the Nawab of Judja. This is the same man shown in summer dress with all the fans, in winter dress with all the shawls, and here riding upon his pet tiger, as one does. It's a fantastic image. The same artist who painted that, Ghulam Ali Khan, begins to paint architectural views in a way that's never been seen before in the Indian tradition, drawing again on European topographical prints, but also with a very Mughal feeling and a very Mughal palette. James Skinner, is Fraser's best friend. He's an Indo-Scottish mercenary. His mother is a Rajput princess. His father is a Scottish East India Company soldier. And Skinner grows up between these two worlds, commissioning art that reflects his position between Europe and Mughal India, speaking more fluently Hindustani and court Persian than he does English. This is Skinner's troops, the famous Skinner's horse, lined up in the court, ready to go off to war. Here Skinner inspecting his estates with all his cattle and his horses, and this is them going off to fight a war, the first Afghan war. You have these portraits of the noble people of Delhi, and you even have portraits of the artist himself. This is Mazhar Ali Khan, or Ghulam Ali Khan, probably Ghulam Ali Khan, the painter. And you see again this mixture of European watercolours in their little watercolour box, with the Mughal pigments which are shown in the oyster shells that Mughal artists used to mix their thing. But he's drawing in the Mughal way. You don't have a canvas resting on a stand in the Mughal tradition. You sit on the floor, you raise one knee, and you paint very close up, looking very carefully at the thing while it's resting on a raised knee. That's the Mughal method for painting. But it begins to change. The atmosphere is on the change. The first evangelicals are coming in. This is Sir Charles Metcalfe and his brother Thomas. You can see them all dressed very much in black and white, strictly monochrome, as opposed to all the colour of the Mughal court. And these two men begin to wrap up the power of the Mughal emperor. But in the process, they also commission one of the last great masterworks to come out of the painting schools of Mughal Delhi. This is the great panorama of Delhi by Mazhar Ali Khan, probably painted about 1846, 1847, done in a great 360-degree panorama from the top of the Lahore Gate of the Red Fort. And it's the last record of Mughal Delhi before Delhi goes into this terrific cataclysm of the Great Mutiny of 1857. The last Mughal emperor I'm going to talk about at Keats's house in far more detail tomorrow, and anyone who would like to come to that is very welcome. But it concerns this man, the last emperor, the subject of my book, The Last Mughal, Bahadur Shah Zafar. And Zafar is the living embodiment, really, of the late Mughal court. Politically, he comes to a completely powerless throne. There is no empire left by the time this painting, the coronation portrait, is produced in 1832. Or it certainly records an event that took place in 1832, a little bit later, the actual painting. But under Zafar, there takes place an extraordinary revolution in taste and feeling of Urdu and Persian poetry. And the reign of Zafar is to Urdu poetry what the reign of Queen Elizabeth I was to English poetry. And the great Indian poet Ghalib, vying with his great rival Zork, with two other great poets, Mir and Dad, also operating in the court, create this atmosphere of intense competition between the different poets, resembling the competition between the early Renaissance artists in this country. They're aware of what each other's doing. They're constantly trying to vault over each other in terms of ambition and achievement. And I'll just read you a letter of Ghalib to show you the feeling of the court at the time. This, again, is a period where today we have this idea of, in the West, of Islam as this very solid, austere, puritanical, monolithic religion. The reality is that Islam, like Christianity, has had many different incarnations and many different forms, and the form that it assumes in late Mughal Delhi is one of great mysticism. This is Sufi mystical, great high point in Sufi mystical poetry, but it's also a period of great dissoluteness. The Delhi courtesans of this time are very much the equal of the great courtesans of the Italian Renaissance, and one of them, famous Pir Bai, was known for turning up stark naked at parties, but so beautifully painted on her body that no one realized she wasn't fully clothed. And Ghalib comes very much out of this world of courtesans, and while his poetry is extremely difficult and complex, his letters are very refreshingly dissolute. I'll just give you an example. This is a letter he writes to his friend whose mistress has just died. And the friend has gone into mourning. His girl is dead. Life will never be the same again. But Ghalib says, cut it out. Mirza Sahib, I don't like the way you're going on. In the days of my lusty youth, the man of perfect wisdom counselled me. Abstinence I do not approve of. Dissoluteness I do not forbid. Eat, drink, and be merry. But remember, the wise fly settles on the sugar and not on the honey. Well, I've always acted on this counsel. You cannot mourn another's death unless you live yourself. Give thanks to God for your freedom and do not grieve. This is now, the next passage should be read to every potential Islamic suicide bomber. Ghalib writes, when I think of paradise and consider how, if my sins are forgiven me, I am installed in a palace in heaven with a Huri. I am filled, to live forever in that worthy woman's company, I am filled with dismay and fear. How wearisome to find her always there, a greater burden than a man could bear. The same old palace, all of emerald made, the same old fruit tree to cast its shade, and God preserve her from all harm, the same old Huri on my arm. Come to your senses, brother, and take another. Take a new woman with each returning spring, for last year's almanac is a useless thing. So this great revolution of poetry takes place at a time when the emperor himself is leading artistic manners. He is a great poet himself. He writes in 4 or 5 different languages, but he's also a great calligrapher. This is, on the left, is an example of his own work, his own monogram, and here is a picture of him at work on a piece of calligraphy. And this is the man who is in charge when Delhi becomes the centre of the greatest anti-colonial revolt to take place anywhere in the world against any colonial power at any point in the 19th century. 100,000 of the East India Company's own troops rise up against the British, surround Delhi, and take the city and use it as a centre of rebellion. And it very nearly succeeds. And it's only because the British managed to recruit a new army of Pathan tribesmen from exactly the areas that the Americans are drone bombing today, Waziristan and the parts of southern Afghanistan and the borderlands of Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's only because of that that the British managed to recapture Delhi. They attack Kashmiri Gate, they bombard it. This is Fraser's old house where the Fraser album was put together. That is bombarded and reduced to ruins. There is a terrible retribution by the British when they recover the city. They hang thousands of men. Any male is considered a fair target. And Zafar is captured and sent off a broken man into exile in Rangoon in Burma, where he dies. His body is put in an anonymous pit after he dies, covered with quicklime, with the aim being that the site will be forgotten forever. And the British hope that that will be the end. And in many ways, it is. But Delhi, just as Rome has done, rises successively from destruction. And immediately after building this building, in 1911, Edwin Lutyens, partly on the basis of the success of his project at the British School in Rome, is posted to New Delhi, where he's given the greatest and largest architectural commission to be given to any British architect since the time of Wren rebuilding London after the Great Fire of 1666. Lutyens is asked to build a whole new capital in New Delhi. And from the plains south of Shah Jahanabad, this extraordinary city comes up. When Lutyens arrives in India, his first drawings resemble the facade of this building. He tries to build in Delhi a classical building that looks like it's come straight out of Rome. But there is pressure on him to build in a Saracenic, Islamic, sub-Mughal tradition, which he resists. But he's sent on a tour of India and hits on the idea of building in an Indian classical style, the Buddhist style of the Emperor Ashoka from about 300 BC. And the buildings that eventually come up in New Delhi are very far from the sort of thing that Lutyens has built here in Rome. They are an extraordinary and very, very brilliant amalgam of classical Indian and classical Roman architectural ideas. With the centerpiece, the main dome of the Viceroy's house, now the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the President's Palace in central Delhi, is based on a Buddhist stupa. And so it's a very, very Indian building which obeys all the rules of classical architecture. It's a very brilliant compromise. For my mind, it's the greatest piece of British architecture of the 20th century, without a shadow of doubt. What's extraordinary, because he feels such a very, very distant world, is that when I first went out to India, there were many people I met who remembered this extraordinary complex coming up. And I went to visit, when I was writing my first book about Delhi, City of Djinns, which is the one I was meant to be talking about today. I went to visit my grandmother's best friend called Iris Portal, who I met in an old folks' home outside Cambridge. And she had retired to this home, and it was in a suburban area of Cambridge with the motorway nearby, thoroughly modern and rather unappealing. But inside her room was a little fragment of 20s, 30s Delhi. She had plans of Lutyens on the wall, all the old Indian books, Kipling and Todd and so on, in her bookshelves. And I'll just read you a little extract of Iris talking about Delhi at that time. My life was extremely frivolous, she said. I was a teenager. At school I'd been very highbrow, and no one talked about anything except Browning and Victorian poetry. But in Delhi, people would have been horrified if they discovered you read poetry. The English in India were not a civilized lot. The atmosphere was too giddy. It was all riding and picnics, clubs and dancing, dashing young men and beautiful polo players. She smiled. Looking back, of course, the whole setup was very odd. There was such snobbery. Everyone was graded off into sections. One would never have dreamt of going anywhere with someone from the Public Works Department. She blinked with horror. Most snobbish of all was the polo, though the Delhi hunt was rather wonderful in its way. All the vice-regal staff, who were usually rather interesting and attractive, came out in their black frock coats, and it was taken very seriously. The hounds were imported from England, and we used to go down to the Qutb Minar in the Model T Ford. The stable boys would have been sent down the night before, and as the sun rose up, we would gallop about the countryside chasing after jackals. But I became interested, she said, in Indian history, and used to go and sit in the Purana Kila, the old fort of Humayun, looking out over this countryside and seeing Djinns Delhi coming up in the distance. Did you ever meet Djinns? I asked. Yes, he was a great friend of my parents, she said. What was he like? Well, he was very taken with my mother. Because my father's name was Monty, he used to call her Carlo. That was typical of Djinns, always making rather childish jokes. He took me around Viceroy's house when it was only 2 or 3 feet high. What I will always remember was going out onto one of the staff bungalows. He said, look, I planned this with a central space in the middle and 8 doors leading off. Some of these doors just led into housemaids' closets. I thought it would be terribly funny, said old Djinns. He was absolutely thrilled with this. That if people had too much to drink at a big party, they'd come home and they wouldn't know which was their door. They'd end up in the cupboards. Iris frowned. He was such a silly man. But of course I greatly admire his work. I love New Delhi. I always thought it was so much better than Washington. And you know, people forget that this magnificent city of Djinns Delhi was built on such a flimsy basis, both human and material. There was no proper scaffolding or any of the equipment they have now, no cranes or mechanical things to help with lifting the weights. I can remember seeing them, these old wizened people, carrying great hoods of bricks and vast bags of cement. There were myriads of them, climbing up bamboo ladders, tied together with string, all getting more precarious the higher it went. Of course, people of my father's generation hated the whole thing. He and my uncle thought it was frightfully extravagant. Those lakhs and lakhs of rupees that could have been far better used elsewhere, they believed. Moreover, they felt that the prophecy, whoever builds a new city of Delhi will lose it, and that this would come true. And if anyone ever raised the subject of New Delhi, my father would always quote the Persian couplet in a most gloomy voice. And of course it did come true. Whoever has built a new city of Delhi has indeed always lost it. The Pandava brothers, Prithviraj Chauhan, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, Shah Jahan, they all built new cities in Delhi and they all lost them. We were no exception. So the great catastrophe that followed the building of New Delhi was the partition of India and Pakistan, which was followed by an enormous set of massacres, partition massacres, in which over 1 million and possibly 1.5 million people were killed. And the British were unprepared for it. There was no proper infrastructure in place to cope with the vast numbers that were set off on the move, moving from India to Pakistan or from Pakistan to India. Many, many Muslims left India, often unwillingly, to go to Pakistan. Many Pakistani Hindus headed back to India, and these streams of refugees would meet somewhere in the Punjab and massacre each other, leaving thousands of corpses in the middle of the monsoon wet earth of the Punjab. A terrible, terrible catastrophe, which is the reason that today Delhi feels, for all that it has the litter of the old in the way that Rome does, it feels in many ways more like Jerusalem, in the sense that very few people who live there now have grandparents who live there. The great majority of people that you will meet socially at any Delhi party, particularly in the middle class, will have come from Lahore, or one of the cities that was emptied of Hindus in the 1940s. The reason that Delhi is such an incredibly materialistic city, in contrast to the stereotypes we have of Indians being non-material and mystical and spiritual people, Delhi is one of the most brutally materialistic cities you can ever visit. And the reason is that everyone lost everything only 2 generations ago, and everything they have has been recreated by hard work, by education, and by struggle over the last 2 generations. The civilization of Delhi was built by the fusing over 2 centuries of the culture of Hindu India and the incoming ideas of Islam coming through Afghanistan and through Persia. And the culture of Delhi is the place where these 2 civilizations met and mingled. Partition in 1947 was an attempt by ideologues in the middle of the 20th century to pretend that that great mingling had never taken place, that you could somehow unravel these very mixed, very hybrid cultures and somehow create what was described as a pure Muslim culture. Pakistan means the land of the pure. And likewise, Hindu right-wingers wanted Shuddh Hindustan, a pure Hindustan. And in partition, you had this great unraveling of all that had been built up. The 2 cultures coming together, entwining each other to produce the sort of miniatures that we've seen on the screen today, to produce the sort of poetry which Ghalib excelled in. And I'll just conclude by reading again from City of Djinns, this book that's now 20 years old. Another visit I did to one of the great Delhi figures. This is Ahmed Ali. Ahmed Ali was the great Delhi novelist. His masterpiece, Twilight in Delhi, was published by the Hogarth Press, greatly revered by E.M. Forster and Virginia Woolf, but the stocks of the first edition were lost when the warehouse of the Hogarth Press was bombed in the Blitz. And he himself, as a Muslim in Delhi, found himself exiled against his will to Pakistan, a city which he never a country which he never believed in. He's dead now, as Iris Portal, the last person I talked about, is. But before he died, I went to see him, and this is what happened when I tracked him down in Karachi. Ahmed Ali wore severe black-rimmed glasses, above which sprouted a pair of thin grey eyebrows. He slurred his consonants and had the slightly limp wrist and effete manner of one who modelled himself on a Bloomsbury original. His hair was the colour of wood ash. For a man once seen as the champion of Delhi's culture, a bulwark of Eastern civilization against the seepage of Western influence, Ahmed Ali now cut an unexpectedly English figure. With his clipped accent and tweed jacket and old leather elbow patches, he could have passed off successfully as a clubland character from a Noel Coward play. But despite his comfortable, well-to-do appearance, Ahmed Ali was an angry man. Over the hours I spent with him, he spluttered and spat like a well-warmed frying pan. The first occasion was when I inadvertently mentioned that he was now a citizen of Pakistan. "Poppycock, balderdash," he said. "I was always against Jinnah, never had any interest in Pakistan." "Steady on," said Shamil Haq, his friend. "The devil," said Ali. "Pakistan's not a country, never was. It's a damned hodgepodge. It's not your country or my country." He was shouting at his friend Shamil Haq now. "It's a country of a damn bunch of feudal lords, robbers, bloody murderers, kidnappers." The outburst spluttered out into silence. "But," I ventured, "didn't you opt for Pakistan in 1947? Surely you could have stayed in Delhi had you wanted to." There was another explosion. "I opted for Pakistan? I did not. I was the visiting professor in Nanking when the blasted partition took place. The bloody swine of Hindus wouldn't let me go back home, so..." "What do you mean?" "I went and saw the Indian ambassador in Peking. Bloody swine said I couldn't return. Said it was a question of Hindu against Muslim, and there was nothing that he could do. I was caught in China and had nowhere to go. Careful, said Shah-ul-Haq, seeing the state that his friend had worked himself up into. So how did you end up in Karachi? I asked. When my salary in Nanking was stopped, I found my way to some friends in Hong Kong. They put me on an amphibious plane to Karachi. Where else could I have gone if I couldn't go back to Delhi? Ali had ceased to quiver with rage and was now merely very cross. I never opted for Pakistan, he said, regaining his poise. The civilization I belong to, the civilization of Delhi, came into being through the mingling of two different cultures, Hindu and Muslim. That civilization flourished for 1,000 years undisturbed until certain people came along and denied that that great mingling had taken place. Views like that can hardly have made you very popular here, I said. They never accepted me in Pakistan, damn it. I've been weeded out. They don't publish my books, they have deleted my name. When copies of Twilight in Delhi arrived at the Karachi customs from India, they sent them back. They said the book was about the forbidden city across the border. They implied the culture was foreign and subversive. Ah. In that case, I said, can't you go back to Delhi? Couldn't you reapply for Indian citizenship? Now, no country is my country, said Ali. Delhi is dead. The city that was, the language, the culture, everything I knew is finished. It's true, said Shah-ul-Haq. I went back 13 years after partition. Already everything was different. I stayed in a new hotel, the Ambassador, which I only later realized had been built on top of a graveyard where several of my friends had been buried. In my mohalla, everyone used to know me, but suddenly I was a stranger. My Haveli was split into 10 parts and occupied by Punjabis. My wife's house had become a temple. Delhi was no longer the abode of the Delhi-walla. It was very depressing. Before partition, said Ali, Delhi was a unique city. Although it was already very poor, still it preserved its high culture. That high culture filtered down to the streets. Everyone was part of it. Even the milkman could quote the poets Mir and Daag. The prostitutes would sing Persian songs and recite Hafiz. They may not have been able to read and write, but they could remember the poets. And the language, said Shah-ul-Haq. You cannot conceive how chaste Delhi Urdu was. And how rich, said Ali. Every mahalla had its own expressions. The language used by our ladies was quite distinct from that used by the men. Now the language has shrunk. So many words are lost. We talked for an hour about the Delhi of their childhood and youth. We talked of the eunuchs and the Sufis and the pigeons and the poets, of the monsoon picnics in Meroli and the Djinn who fell in love with Ahmed Ali's aunt. We talked of the sweetmeat shops which stayed open until 3 a.m, the sorcerers who could cast spells over a whole mahalla, the possessed women who would run vertically up the zanana walls, and the miraculous cures effected by Hakim Ajmal Khan. The old men swam together through great oceans of nostalgia before finally coming ashore on a strand of melancholy. But all of it is no more, said Ali. All that made Delhi special has been uprooted and dispersed. Now it is a carcass without a soul, said Shah-ul-Haq. I am a fossil, said Ali, and Shah-ul-Haq is on his way to becoming a fossil. But nevertheless, I insisted, if you both love Delhi so much, wouldn't you like to see it just one more time? I will never see that town again, said Ali. Once I was invited to give some lectures in Australia. The plane landed, but I refused to get out. I said, I'm not getting out. I did have to. You call your damn chairman. But I'm not putting one foot on that soil that was sacred to me and which has been desecrated. They got the entire staff of the airport there to get me out, but I didn't move. How could I? How could I revisit that which once was mine and now was no longer mine? When they asked why I was behaving as I was, I simply sat in my seat and quoted Mir Taki Mir at them. What matters it to a breeze if now has come the spring, when I have lost them both, the garden and my nest? What happened, I asked. The swine were all Punjabi, said Ali. Tell you the truth, I don't think they understood a bloody word I said. Thank you.